Hello, listener. Welcome to our podcast, our Sign Along Indonesian podcast. So today we will have very interesting conversation with a very famous researcher from UK. Welcome, Professor Kieron Sheehy.
Oh, thank you.
Founder of Sign Along Indonesia, as well as Professor of Innovative Pedagogic in the Open University of UK. How are you, Professor?
I'm very well. And how are you?
Oh, I'm very well. A little bit cold. You can see my.
Oh, I could see the backdrop. Yes.
Yeah. So let me share my screen first. Okay, I prepare the presentation. Okay. So it's about DRRE, or Inclusive Disaster Risk Education, your project, your current project in Indonesia.
Okay.
And before we ask some of question, let me read something first, Professor. It is also said in your research that Indonesia sits within the Pacific region's ring of fire and is one of the nations that experience most disaster each year through the volcanic and then eruption, tsunamis, earthquakes, and also floods and some other things. When we talk about the victims, it is significantly higher mortality and injury rates for persons with disability. And sadly, the mortality rates for children with disability are very high. It's like 30 to 50% of that. And in Indonesia, this risk is much higher for children with disability. And we know that the inclusion of disabled people within disaster risk reduction program is the human right, and these people must be afforded the same right to this DRR. So could you please tell us more about the urgency of the DRRE project?
Okay. Well, the project itself was sort of suggested, the direction was suggested through conversation with Indonesian teachers. It came up just a casual conversation, and then later when we ran a project on inclusive classrooms, teachers were saying one thing they would like the books and materials that we were creating to do would be to support curriculum activities concerning disaster risk reduction education, what to do when to educate children about disasters and what they might do when they occur. So it's educational approach, and so that started us off. So we thought, well, the first thing we needed to do was to an overview of the research that had happened in Indonesia regarding not just disaster risk reduction education, which is quite well known, but disaster risk reduction education that was accessible for children with disabilities. By that I mean could be understood by a child with special educational needs, someone who may be deaf or blind, or a child with severe learning difficulties. Were materials in schools that could help teachers deliver that sort of content and understanding to children. So we did in this paper here, which you kindly put up, we did a literature review, but it was more than just a literature review. So we looked firstly at the research that had been done, and we found there was hardly any mention of accessibility. And where it was mentioned, it was just in passing, or to say that it didn't exist. Then we looked at those studies to look at programs that were currently running in Indonesia. And then we followed up on the evaluations of those programs that had occurred. So there were three-tiered approach. What research had been done, what programs are mentioned as running in schools, and then how those programs been evaluated. And I won't go into the details, but the thing that came out is it was rare, if even non-existent, for these programs to be reviewed in terms of their accessibility for children with special educational needs. And the notion of inclusive education, where children might be taught together in the same school, and so we'd have programs that could be understood by everyone, didn't really occur at all in this context. Now, we thought this could be flawed because obviously research is happening over here, but what goes on in schools is different. So we put a questionnaire out to, I can't remember how many teachers.
Yeah.
About 700, I think. I can't remember. About 700 teachers from across Indonesia to get a picture of what was happening in their schools. And we got the same picture, basically, that teachers were using a variety of... Sorry, my computer is talking in my ear. I must close it. There were programs that were being used, but not in most schools. And the programs that were being used, on the whole, weren't accessible for children with special educational needs. There were some programs that teachers said were accessible for children with learning disabilities, other programs or practices that teachers were doing for maybe children who had visual impairment or were deaf. And so there were isolated pockets, but there was no program that was designed to be inclusive for all, or where accessibility seemed to be built in. We got the sense that the teachers, the few teachers who were doing this, were doing it themselves. Now, that's a good thing because it can be done at a local level, and the Indonesian curriculum, can be developed at local level, and so it can be tailored to the needs of the community and the school, because obviously the diversity of cultures and contexts in Indonesia is so vast. So in summary, the research suggests that there's a need for accessible and inclusive disaster risk reduction education. Our own research teachers shows that it's lacking. It really is lacking. There may be isolated pockets of good practice, which we will need to investigate and draw upon, but there is a need for this. And teachers wanted to explore this issue with us. They wanted to look at how we might provide inclusive and accessible disaster risk reduction education. And just to say, this idea has come up also in some parallel research we did in kindergartens. I think I may have mentioned it previously, but the idea that teachers wanted some materials that would fit into the curriculum about the natural world, disasters, what to do. And we're talking here primarily kindergarten, primary school children.
That's wonderful research, I think. I'm really glad to join in this research.
Yes, you were on there.
So, Professor, you talked about the finding, about the you focus also on early childhood education, to develop the story big book, something like that. And we are very curious to know more about that.
Okay.
Yes, yeah.
Well, the storybook idea came about from a project we've been running, looking at how to help teachers in inclusive classrooms, because what our discussions with teachers said, they'd like approaches that would work, simple approaches that were fun, that they could do that work. So we developed science-supported big books for kindergarten. This is one thing we did. So a teacher would have a nice big storybook, and on each page of the story would be supported by a single sign, just the one sign. And the notion of fun in how it was delivered was very important. We really learned that from all the Indonesian teachers we talked to. So we have these storybooks, and they seem to work. When we asked teachers about them, they said they liked to use them. When they were given them, they used them regularly, and children learned from them. We did some comparisons of classes with and without the sign-supported element of the book, and the sign support helped all the children learn, not just children who may have special educational needs. In fact, some of our studies were in schools where there were no children with special educational needs, and we showed that this approach benefited them. So that's quite important, an approach that works on the whole for everyone. So the next stage was, we thought, well, we have an approach that seems to work, that teachers like and use. Can we use this approach then in the context of disaster risk reduction education? So this is, I think the screenshot shows 3 of the books that were kindly developed by the very innovative people at UNESA. So that's Ibu Fia and Ibu Wida, sorry, but it's really good stuff. So what we have here are 3 books. We can see flood, earthquake, and volcano eruption. And each book is a simple story and information about each of those contexts, supported by a keyword sign. Now, the idea of doing this is this method, it will be more memorable for the children, so they'll remember these things. And based on our other research, we predict that will happen, and we're currently evaluating that. That children will enjoy doing this. And that's a difficult question, because when we're talking about something that is frightening and potentially life-threatening, how we teach it is not always obvious. We wish to give children information and provide understanding of what to do in these situations, so they know what is happening and what to do, but there's that risk of scaring them as well. And so I've had discussions with teachers not in Indonesia, only in Europe, who say, oh, well, you can't make it fun. But our approach is that it should be enjoyable, so that teachers like using it and the children like using it, and they remember. And it's important to see that this is, we have an ABC model. And this, so we have education about events before they happen, that's this one. Then further down the line is what to do when it actually happens, and then we have what to do afterwards. So we are focusing our work at the moment on the A part, on education, so children have an understanding of these events when they happen. So that's where we are.
Yeah, Professor, you mentioned about sign along Indonesia. There is like sign in each sentence. Can you please tell us a bit about that? Because some teachers here in Indonesia have like a different perception about sign, because signing is related to the deaf community.
Yes.
So can you please?
It's a common perception, not just in Indonesia, because this is keyword signing, but even in the UK here, where we've had keyword signing for a long time, or in Ireland, where we have keyword signing, or on the continent in Europe, sometimes there's a perception that, oh, we're talking about a deaf language here, and these children aren't deaf. And it's not. Deaf sign language of the deaf community is a rich, beautiful language that varies between, so you've got British Sign Language, we've got Irish Sign Language, all different rich languages. With keyword signing, it's very simple. It's not a language like the language of the deaf community. It's support for the spoken word, or for the narrative that's going on. And it only uses a keyword, really just 1, sometimes 2 words per sentence. So it's much simpler. It's just a support. But what we find when we look at the effectiveness of using this, for example, with books, is that it really helps the children remember the story and improves their comprehension. And they love signing. And we found that teachers who may have negative perceptions about signing, which exists all around the world, for example, it makes the children look different, makes them look as if they're deaf, and that's stigmatized where we are. This approach we're taking a mainstream approach, which is for all, teachers seem much happier to use it. It's because it's so simple, because it's fun, and because it's for all. So it seems to be useful in that respect. And we've got here, in my terrible Indonesian, so we've got, I know our signers here. They're your students.
Please, yeah.
Hello.
Gempa unit.
Yeah, yes. So we have floods are caused by humans and nature. And Kiki, this is an earthquake. Is that correct?
Yes, it is correct.
And we would just sign flood, and we would just sign earthquake, but we would say the whole word.
Yeah.
Kiki in a gempa. You see, we'd only sign Gempa.
Oh, you have a good bahasa Indonesian already.
Only in very narrow context.
Oh, can you can you please read it?
Banjir disebabkan oleh manusia atau alam.
Yo, good, bravo. Yeah, sometimes flood is because of the human being, or
yes, or nature.
yes, yeah, and I heard.
Oh, may I just say
please.
that one of the sorry, my computer is speaking again. One of the things when people see this, they think, "Oh, I will not be able to remember all these signs." You know, teach made it. But with each book, we have a story page. On the back of that page is the sign that you need shown. So as you read the story, you can see the sign. So you never have to worry about, oh, I don't know it. It's always there for you. And if you need other signs, you can look them up in one of our manuals. But it's very relaxed. It's a very relaxed approach. It's friendly. Oh.
Yeah, this is a teacher training that we conduct before the next research activity. And here you mentioned before we have like a big book, and then like a calendar who can stand in the table, and then behind this page is signing page, and yeah, also the sentence of the story.
Yes. So it's a lovely approach to use, that it's simple and it's fun. You have your book, the children can sit around or wander around, look at you, and then you read the story, and the children will sign along when you get to the sign, or you can ask them. You know, so it's very nice and friendly.
Yeah, I also heard that you already developed the digital version of this. Yeah.
Well, I think you know more about the digital version than I do. I think you are the digital innovator. Oh. Tell us about the digital version. I would not take credit for your great work.
No, maybe this is interview for you. So
you're very modest. Very modest. One of the things I would say is that during the pandemic, we did have requests for digital versions so that teachers could share them easily and quickly. And Ibufia modestly is playing down her role, but you certainly developed that. So we have Sidra, which is an app, freely available on Google and iOS. But one of the things about the books is that they're designed to be used with the whole class in a nice, how can I put it? When we were talking to Indonesian teachers and we went into Indonesian schools, one of the things that teachers valued was a sense of community is the wrong word, but being together, togetherness. And from this perspective of inclusion, that's really important. So the books are designed for groups of children to hear together, small for any short period of time. The books are not long. Be together for a short period of time to hear a story and to listen to it together, and maybe sign together on the few signs they have. Now, the next stage of research is we have the digital resources, but we are slightly uncertain as to how they are being used. So are they being used on an individual basis? And that would be slightly, it may be what people wish, or it fits a particular circumstance. But is that sort of undermining that Indonesian communal approach to learning, which we see as very valuable? So that's a future research area. But yes, digital resources are there. So very useful if you wish to access signs about particular things. You have it on your phone. If you wish to look at stories, if you wish to share them via a screen, as some teachers have said they've been doing. So there's a whole variety that you can engage with using digital practice. But we need to research that further. Now, if I may say, we have a conference coming up. I know you'll ask me about this later maybe, but actually have one of the world's leading experts in use of digital technology, storytelling with young children coming. That's Professor Natalia Kuchikova, and she'll be at the upcoming conference. And she is the person I hope that we can get advice and support from, and maybe lead, she's a member of our team now, to examine this area. It's very important, I think. My sense of the approach here is that the big books, the physical books, work well in classrooms where we have the classrooms. So I need to be convinced that the digital technologies are being used in ways that support inclusion. Now, Professor Kuchikova, Natalia, has done research which shows that digital resources can be used in ways that support development and social interactions, and that's her strength. So I'll be handing that issue over to her.
That's wonderful information, Professor.
I like the books.
I also love the book. So you, to be more clear, you provide the funding to develop and produce this book series,
yes,
and distribute to the schools in all provinces in Indonesia. Yeah.
Yes, it's only a small number because obviously everyone knows Indonesia is so huge. So we would hopefully, once we've done this next stage of evaluation, so we have 100 or so, a couple of hundred teachers evaluating the new books and the new vocabulary, and we'll be able to see what they think of it. We also have more of an experimental study going on before. Previously, we have compared schools that use the books with signs with schools that use the books without signs, and we found that the signs improve learning. But there is always a risk that what we're seeing there is a difference between the schools. So we are currently running a study, a counterbalance study, which will enable us to examine more strongly the effect of the symbols within the books. So that's quite an important one for us. We'll be able to control for individual variation between the children and the teachers and the schools. So it's a little complicated research design, but it'll be important. When we've done that, then, sorry, I need to say why I was saying this is we will be seeking, I think, funding, assuming that the results are positive, funding to support wider distribution of these materials and these type of materials to schools.
So, Professor, you can see how happy teacher, receive the books and get some training, how to use this book, how to sign. They're very happy, and I also believe that so many teachers who get the books from you is very happy.
Oh, good.
Yes. Let me understand more. You also give another funding from previous books produced. It's like 200 packets.
Yes.
Yeah. That's wonderful, wonderful project, because in Indonesia, I think we never received some project like this. It's very beneficial to them to practice their learning. Yeah.
Okay. It is based on what teachers felt would work in their classrooms. So we hopefully have given teachers what they want. Yes, so we have previously, with the science supported books, given that out to many schools, and there are many thousands of children now using science supported big books.
Oh. So why you choose Indonesia? Sorry, is that appropriate or not?
Why Indonesia? Well, one thing I'll say, why Indonesia? Prof Budianto is probably the big reason.
Mm-hmm.
I met Prof Budianto many years ago, and we had a really good discussion. And he has a vision for inclusive education in Indonesia, and he's a person, I don't know how to say this, who delivers. So he makes things happen, and he has a great belief in Indonesian teachers and doing good for the nation. And so I found him a very inspirational person. So I was very happy to work with Prof Budianto. So none of this would have happened without him. None of it.
I know it's because of him.
Yeah, so Prof Priyanto is the first reason why this would happen. The next thing is, the more time I spent in Indonesia, the more I learned. And I think in terms of inclusive education, Indonesia has big challenges because it's so geographically different, culturally different, so many languages. And yet people wish, when I interview teachers, they wish to teach, they feel it's their role to teach the children in their communities. So we have a challenging context, but teachers whose attitudes are very positive, and that was very impressive. The other thing I seen so many good Indonesian teachers. So much of what we have here has not come from me, or it's from the teachers themselves. So I have a great respect for Indonesian teachers. So when we say there's a need for accessible and inclusive disaster risk reduction, I know that in Indonesia somewhere there'll be teachers who are doing top quality work, and we need to, that's the next part of the research, to track them down. We pick them up through our questionnaires to meet with them and see what they're doing. Because so that's the other reason why Indonesia. I like Indonesian teachers. I like what they're doing. I like their attitudes, and the role of fun in education, particularly early education. It's transformative, really, for me. I found it really interesting because when we in English schools talk about the notion of fun, it is different to how it's used in Indonesia. In Indonesia, teachers, well, I won't bore you with I could go on for ages about that, but it was very interesting. So why Indonesia? Firstly, I met Prof Priyanto, and he really was impressed, and I thought an impressive person who I'd want to support his work, and this is supporting his work. Then the concept of inclusion, I think, was very important in Indonesian society. It's challenging, but I was very impressed by the people I've met, and I've been to many schools now, met many teachers, and I'm still impressed. So
exactly, Professor, you're talking about the fun in learning, the happiness. Yeah, when I interviewed teachers in Indonesia, the first thing I learned is you need to be a fun or a happiness teacher before you teach.
yes.
So that's different, really.
Very different, very different. I'm interested in reading your research because you are comparing Indonesian teachers with European teachers, and I'll be very interested to read that.
Thank you very much. Dziękuję, Professor. And a little bit hard for me,
You'll be fine.
Okay. You mentioned about conference which is held this month in Jakarta, in Indonesia, in Surabaya. Could you please tell us about it?
Okay. Well, as you've seen, we have done research which suggests there is a need for inclusive disaster risk reduction education in Indonesia. We have some ideas about how we might provide some of the education part of that, but we need to learn and develop more. And so one of the things we wanted was to get top people together. So what's Prof Dana's name? I haven't got my glasses on. So for example, UNESA has a disaster crisis center, which is very well regarded. And we have Dr. Diana coming along to talk there. So I'm very pleased that she's there. We also have members of our research team. We're sort of we're a joint project really between the Open University and UNESA in Surabaya. But part of our team here, we have, may I just introduce people and talk about them?
Yeah.
So we have, so we wanted to have a good range of knowledge from people from outside Indonesia. So obviously the first port of call will be Japan, which has got a very, very strong reputation for disaster risk reduction education and good disaster risk management. So we're very fortunate to have people from Japan coming. Similarly, New Zealand has done people are doing some excellent work in New Zealand, and we've got Prof Carol Much coming along, which would just be wonderful. I cite her work a lot. Then we have a range of people who, for different reasons, we have Saskia van Menen will be there. She has worked in South America, looking at community education, but also how the uptake of helpful ideas. She has a good understanding of community level disaster risk education and how to get people to change their behavior, to do things that will help them. That sort of issue. I hope I haven't misrepresented Saskia. We have Shirley Sagia from Jakarta, and I know first came across Shirley's work. She's done lovely stuff, very Indonesian, on disaster risk education with communities, creating songs and activities. And that's very rare. But of course, having songs is very important in parts of Indonesia, because not only will it help the learning, and they'll be passed along through children into families and into communities, and it's fun. So it's important and fun. So we have a range of people coming from different countries. We have people from Malaysia. We have who else we've got? We've got myself. So we wanted the conference to put together different voices and different perspectives on the same issue, that we can learn and go forward, because coming out of this, I hope, will be developments and projects where we work together and submit bids to get funding in Indonesia for Indonesian people to carry on the work. Because one of the things we want to do is support people in Indonesia developing this, which most of our team is Indonesian, but we want to support them more in their careers and everything.
Yeah, Professor, this conference supported by UNESA and also Seamiosen and APKI. APKI is
yes, that is so good.
Education Association in Indonesia.
Yeah, so we're very fortunate. And I think it will be quite world leading, really, in its focus, because there have been other disaster risk reduction conferences, and they mention inclusion or have inclusion in the title. But the focus here is very different, and it is unique. Again, I think it's a kind of a first for UNESA, really, and it's nice to be working with the top organizations here. Inclusive and accessible in the curriculum, and we're looking at the A part, and then in our discussions afterwards, I hope we will look at the B during the event, what happens during the disaster event. And then also we've got experts in the C part, what happens after the disaster, clear up, counselling, children who have lost their families, or all those issues there. What do we do longer term? What do you do to children coming back into school who've experienced this and now they're back into school, but the things they experienced could have been quite traumatic. So ABC, I'm over on the A side, but we have people here who are B and C, and I think together we can create something quite unique.
Okay, so we can see here that the submission is extended until 10th of October.
Oh,
so
good.
For all listener who interested with this conference, please follow this one. The more information it's provided in http://apki.org.id, and we wait until 10 October to submit the full paper or the abstract that's related with this topic.
Okay, and may I ask a question? People can submit papers about inclusive education in general, is that correct?
Yes.
Lovely. So it doesn't have to be about disaster education, it can be about any aspect of inclusive education.
Yes.
I think that's helpful. I think that's really good.
Divide like two different big themes. It's like disaster risk reduction for disability, and we also not focus on that, but also focus in the disability inclusion in many
Yes, I think that's very helpful, because again, people will be able to experience both topics, both helpful to each other.
So you will be in Surabaya in this conference?
I will be in Surabaya.
Oh,
my second home.
Oh,
I'm
welcome, Professor.
Terima kasih.
So This is the further information. If you like to know more about Sinalong Indonesia, please visit this website, sinalongindonesia.unesa.ac.id or ID. And we have also Facebook fan page. It's a Sinalong Indonesia, and also the Instagram. You can search Sinalong Indonesia. So let me stop share. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your I don't know, like very interesting idea about how your project in Indonesia, how you manage all things. I mean, like how you collaborate with all people and experts to specified in Indonesia. So that's very wonderful, and we learned so much from you, Professor. Thank you for that, and I wish you can come back in next year and we can meet in Indonesia.
Oh, that would be wonderful.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor. Wish you have a good time, have a good weekend, and keep healthy, okay?
Sama-sama.
Okay.
Sampai jumpa.
Sampai jumpa. Let me